Hello beautiful people, welcome back to my channel. This is True Crime Anniversary and my name is Yinka Bikini. I know that it's been a couple of weeks, I think, since I recorded a true crime story. I don't know if you know, but I had a baby and life be happening, but we are back, and today we are looking into a case that really shook a small rural community in Alabama back in the summer of 1997. It's one of those cases that didn't have loads of documentation. It didn't go global. It was only reported on locally, but it's a story that I really wanted to share with you for reasons that we're going to get into. It starts out with a father and son who set out for a quiet day of fishing, but they never came home. So this is the story of Harold and Joey Pugh. What began as a peaceful afternoon in Creek Canyon turned into a devastating tragedy that would end with arrests, with trials, with a family changed for absolutely ever. So it was July 20th, which is, how many years ago is that now? 28, I believe. 28 years ago this week. And 41-year-old Harold Pugh and his 11-year-old son Joey, they drove out to one of their favourite nature spots, which was in Colbert County, and this was a really rural area full of creeks and woods and high grass and all of the good things that you kind of want on a day out. It was calm, it was tucked away, and it was, I would say, the kind of place that you go to escape everything. But that day something went horribly wrong. Over the next few days, a disturbing discovery would unravel, one that would leave a community with a lasting mark, and it would spark a multi-agency investigation involving 5 suspects, all of them young men, some of them barely even out of high school. So let's get into the story of the Pugh family murders. And I'm pretty sure it's Pugh, like Florence Pugh, but it might be Pugh. Anyway, our story starts on the morning of July 20th, and Harold and his son Joey packed up their gear. They headed out for a day of fishing in one of their favourite spots, and it was something they did often. It was a quiet day, just the two of them, but this trip it would end differently. So on this channel, on this YouTube, I cover crimes on the anniversaries that should never really be forgotten, and this is one of those, because when Harold and Joey didn't go home that evening, their family started to grow worried. At first, everyone hoped it was something small, and I think that if you've ever had a loved one who has, I don't know, missed the bus or got stuck in a meeting and not called you, or if you've got kids or nieces or nephews who have got detention and not been able to be on their phones, this sort of thing goes through your mind. You think and you hope that it's nothing, but as the hours passed, that quiet worry that was rumbling in the bellies of those who knew them, it grew into something heavier. So by the next day, they were reported missing. So there was local law enforcement who got involved. There were helicopters who aided in the search, because of course this is a rural area, and volunteers as well. And they were all called in to search the preserve that the two were known to have been visiting. The area was thick, it was rugged, there were woods, rocky paths, streams cut through, and it was the kind of place that you could disappear without a trace. And for 2 days, that's exactly what seemed to have happened. Because on July 22nd, the search for the man and his son came to a sudden and I would describe devastating end. Their white pickup truck that they had driven was found by volunteers and police who were searching. Now, that was found in a remote spot and it was burned out. It was barely recognisable. And near the vehicle, bullet casings were recovered. And not far from there, searchers found the bodies of Harold and Joey. Both had been shot. Harold had been hit multiple times, and Joey, just 11 years old, had also been shot and he died at the scene. Both of them did. Investigators believe that the fire was set after the attack, most likely to cover any evidence or to sort of destroy any evidence of the crime. And the scene was a shocking one. A peaceful father and son trip turned into a brutal double murder, and for their loved ones and for the community, everything changed. With the discovery of the truck and their bodies, the missing persons case quickly became a double homicide, and investigators now had 2 major questions. Who would do something like this? And I guess equally as importantly, why? Colbert County, which is where this took place in Alabama, is rural. It wasn't the kind of place where violent crime was common, and especially not something like murder, not something this brutal. And it made the case even harder to understand, and the pressure on investigators to find answers grew really quickly. So when we talk about the case in the investigation, I should let you know that leads came super early on because of the physical evidence at the scene. So of course the bullet casings were found, it confirmed there was a gun that had been used, and they believed that whoever did this hadn't just stumbled across the vehicle, they brought a weapon with them, suggesting at least some kind of planning had taken place, a plan for violence anyway. As word spread throughout the community, local news began covering the case and people started paying attention. So a tip came from somebody, and they said that they had seen an 18-year-old boy who went by the name of Jason Riddle driving around town in Harold's white pickup truck shortly after the murders. So in that 2-day window between Harold and his son going missing and their bodies being discovered. The identity of the tipster has never been made public. I will put all of my research links into the video description so you can have a look at what I looked at to shape this story, but it isn't super easy to find that specific information, and it's fine that the information wasn't made public, especially when it leads you straight to the guy who's driving around in the same vehicle that would later be found smouldering in the woods. Jason had no known connection to the Pugh family, and Harold and Joey had just been reported missing, so the sighting raised serious questions and concerns and suspicions and gave investigators their first real lead. So he was brought in for formal questioning, and I did look, there was no clear record of exactly how long he was questioned for. I just think it's worth saying because we've all watched documentaries and heard stories of how these things can go, how like a kid from the wrong side of the tracks is brought in under pressure and he's desperate to get out of the room, so he says something just to make the questioning stop. I'm not saying that's what happened here, it's just something that I think it's important to think about. So whatever the case anyway, Jason did start talking, and what he said completely changed everything for investigators. He told police he hadn't been alone, and I'm going to have to look at my trusty laptop now to get actually what he said because it's a little bit complicated. So Jason's confession opened a door for investigators. Let's get into it. According to him, the plan wasn't to hurt anyone. Him and 4 other people had gone out to Cane Creek Preserve to look to steal a truck. That was it. Something quick, something easy, something to flip, drive around, whatever it is that these young boys wanted to do, that's what they wanted to do. And somewhere rural like that, they didn't expect to run into anyone. But then they came across Harold and Joey. So Jason claimed in this confession that things escalated quickly. Harold confronted them, there was shouting, someone pulled a gun, and before anyone could back down, shots were fired. He said that Harold was hit first and then Joey later. There's no clear version of who fired the shots. Jason said one thing, the other people said something else, because once he had named names, they were all brought in for questioning too, and everyone had a different story when it came to the details. But in the end, the important thing was that Harold and Joey were left dead and the group drove off in the truck. They later came back to the scene to try and cover their tracks. The truck was set on fire, but they left the bodies behind. That is the version that Jason gave, and if it's the full truth, I think that's something only the people who were there and those who didn't survive are really going to know. Once the 4 others were arrested, the story started to change, flip up, put that thing down, flip it and reverse it, because everyone had something to say, but none of it lined up perfectly. Everyone had their own version of events. So Jason said that he didn't pull the trigger. There was someone there called Alan Yates. He admitted to being there, but he said he didn't shoot anyone and that he didn't know anything was going to go violent. The others were Russell Bonds, Jason Minor, and Jason Riddle's brother, Jeffrey Riddle. They all denied being the ones who fired the gun, and some of them even suggested that they stood back while the ruckus and the confrontation unfolded. It was... the only way I can describe it is a he said situation. They all kind of admitted to being there. They all kind of admitted to witnessing the act in some kind of way, but no one was admitting to be the person that pulled the trigger. But under Alabama law, that doesn't quite matter as much as you and me think that it would. So this was ruled a capital murder case because Harold and Joey were killed during the commission of another felony, and that felony was attempted robbery. That charge, the capital murder charge, carries the harshest possible penalty under Alabama law. So even if you didn't fire the gun, if you are part of a crime that leads to a murder, you could be charged with capital murder. And in this case, the harshest possible sentence is life in prison without parole. Jason Riddle and Alan Yates both ended up with that sentence, and here's why. Jason confessed. He admitted to being there. He was seen driving the truck hours after the murder, which directly tied him to the crime. Alan Yates denied being the shooter, but he was believed to be present during the violence, and he was involved in setting the truck on fire afterwards. So the court saw them both as having played a direct role in the killings and the attempted cover-up, and that's why they were punished the most harshly. The other three received lesser sentences, so some cooperated, others were seen to have more of a limited involvement, but all of them were held accountable in some way. Harold and Joey Pugh went out that morning for nothing more than a quiet day together, father and son, out in nature doing simple things, something that should have been safe. And what happened to them, of course, was senseless, but it was permanent. So on this channel, I look back at true crime on the anniversary, but it's not just to revisit the details, it's to remember the people, the impact, and the questions that still hang in the air. This case happened back in 1997, so the resources are not amazing, but this is what I do know about Harold and Joey. Harold was 41 and he was a hardworking man who loved being outdoors and spending time with his family. He kept to himself mostly, but he was well liked, and he was especially close with his son. His son was bright, he was energetic, and he was the kind of kid who was always excited to go fishing with his dad. This was something they did often, and this day, the last day of their lives, was meant to be just another one of those trips, another day to spend bonding, being calm, being in familiar surroundings, and having some fun. Something that I did find really fascinating about this case and cases like it, and something that I wanted to sort of share with you, is especially in somewhere like Alabama, how the law is treated and carried out, and how it treats involvement. So like in the UK, we have something called joint enterprise, which is if you are part of a group of people who commit a crime, you can be charged with that crime whether or not you pulled the trigger or you were directly involved in the act of violence. But in the US and in Alabama, under capital murder statutes, it doesn't matter if the prosecution can't prove who actually pulled a trigger. If someone is killed during a felony like robbery, everyone can be charged like they fired the shot themselves. And it's not just robbery. These laws apply if someone is killed during a burglary, a kidnapping, an arson, a sexual assault, even escaping from custody. The list is quite long. The thinking behind it is clear. If you're part of a serious crime and someone ends up dead, you carry that weight whether you meant for it to happen or not. And when you see this, it kind of makes sense and you think, yeah, definitely. But I found myself wondering, what could someone do if they find themselves in this kind of situation and they did not mean to be, because that is possible. Once things happen, once it starts to spiral, it's really hard to undo what's already happened. But from a legal standpoint, this is what I found, okay? So not that any of you guys should be committing crimes, but if you are in a group of people and something happens, it's really difficult to just be a silent witness and not be culpable. So the advice is, I guess we can call it advice, you have to go to the police straight away. It's not days later or once appeals go out. It isn't after you've helped cover something up. It's immediately after the crime is committed. You go to the police, because their view of it is that if you are innocent, if you didn't know it was going to happen, if you were not part of that group of people, you would seek help from law enforcement. You have to prove that you had no idea something criminal was going to unfold. And if you don't, that makes you part of it. So that makes you legally and criminally culpable. The law doesn't allow for bystanders in those moments, not when it's this serious. So in this case, it wasn't about who pulled the trigger. We genuinely never got a clear answer, and we probably won't get a clear answer. Everyone pointed fingers, nobody took full responsibility, but in the end, the court decided it didn't need to know who fired the gun, just that someone did, and the rest were there when it happened. So there you go. That is the story of the Pugh family murders. Thank you for watching. If you like your true crime, then subscribe and all of that sort of stuff. I'll be back shortly after I finish breastfeeding to bring you another case, but thanks for watching.